Welcome to Harmonic Horizons, where we explore new realms and possibilities in sound. In each episode, we'll delve into the vast world of music and sound, discovering innovative techniques, emerging genres, and the untold stories behind the notes. I'm Chris from S1gns Of L1fe. I'm an ambient music producer and content creator from the Bay Area in California. I'm the co-founder of Synphaera Records, and I release music as S1gns Of L1fe, Starterra, and Ascendant.
What's up, guys? I'm John. I teach audio and sound design and how synthesizers work. And today we have a really cool guest joining us. Today our guest is...
Hey, I'm Dash Glitch. I'm a music producer, a YouTuber, and sound designer. I probably most well known for my Vital tutorials. Otherwise, some Bitwig stuff, all sorts of sound design tutorials on YouTube. Otherwise, I do have like sound packs and that kind of thing that I do. Otherwise, just general music production stuff. I've been producing music ever since I can remember, over 10 years now. Well over 10 years now, actually. And we're here to talk about my journey, I guess.
Exactly. Dash, first of all, I want to say for myself, John, and probably everybody who's going to watch and listen to this show, thank you. You've been a huge help on our own musical journey. Your tutorials are always so inspiring, and they're very informative and they have a good flow to them. So hats off from the whole audio community. Thank you for doing what you do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We really appreciate it. To that end, I really want to figure out, who is Dash Glitch? Like, where did your journey begin and how did you arrive at the musical place you are today?
Okay, so I guess that's quite an open-ended question. We could start with, I guess, the very beginning. I've always really been into music as a child. I come from a household where my mom is an art teacher. My father is a musician, so it was one or the other. It was definitely a creative field for me. I kind of explored a little bit of piano and drums when I was younger, but at the time, I guess the teaching in those styles or in those instruments wasn't really fulfilling for me. I kind of always knew that I wanted to make full songs. When I listened to music, I kind of envisioned full songs and the sounds in the process as opposed to just performing, which is a lot of the time what you would learn in music. So after a couple of years of music, I kind of gave up with it, went through school and everything, and then got to the end of school and, you're faced with a choice of like, what do you do now? I'm like, there's that thing. I was kind of like a bit of a lazy punk at the time and wanted to pick the kind of easiest option. And I was like, there was that thing, there was that music thing that I was into. And I started kind of diving into it and realized that I had kind of like this deeper passion for it that I kind of like left unexplored. Yeah. So I guess for a little bit I'd been playing in bands and stuff as well and learned a little bit about the recording process of, like recording guitars, recording drums and all that kind of thing. And so when I'd finished school, I decided to study audio engineering, where you learn to record bands and mixing and all that kind of thing. But I still kind of felt a little bit unfulfilled in terms of like where I wanted to go, like in the profession, if you know what I mean. Because I guess at the time there wasn't really much there wasn't content, there wasn't YouTube, there wasn't anything like that. So I kind of finished the course. Worked in a couple of studios, but the industry wasn't really big locally. So moved on to working in local music shops for quite a while. Probably about 8 years to 10 years. I worked in a couple of different music shops around town. And I guess that was probably the biggest part of the journey in terms of like my networking, being able to buy gear because people would buy gear and then they wouldn't sell it. So I would have the opportunity to then buy it secondhand. And it was just a great opportunity because, for myself, I was like still young at the time, couldn't really afford the expensive gear and stuff. So that was a kind of really good opportunity. And I kind of just spent the time after hours learning the different software and stuff. And one day I discovered a thing called Serum. And I guess that's when it was like,
Yes.
I would literally like sit in the office with my laptop, like trying to figure this thing out. And like, you know, I hope the boss is not watching this, you know, but like on the boss's hours, like trying to figure this thing out. And I got to the point where, actually to backtrack a little bit, I started getting into electronic music as well at the time. And also discovered Fruity Loops. So, so the beginning of my journey basically started with Fruity Loops, but I basically just had a demo version which I downloaded, and I had experience with like recording bands to tapes because we had at the time we had this like Tascam tape recorder. So I would like do a session in Fruity Loops and just record it to tape and then not save the session. And so I kind of built this habit of like designing sounds like every time, you know, like recreating a kick drum every time, recreating a bass line every time. And I guess that habit kind of like helped me to learn like the differences of what each knob does. Like what does the resonance do? What does the cutoff do? Because you're really listening to the finer details like over and over and over again, like on repeat, you know. Let's see, where are we in the journey now? Okay, so
and this is all in South Africa, yes? This is all in
yeah. This is I've basically lived in South Africa my whole life. So this has all been in South Africa. The music industry here is it's thriving in terms of the inspiration, but there's not much of an industry, put it that way. There's incredible artists and like incredible music here, but there's not much of an industry here for the artists and stuff. So I started exploring like the internet, which was still, I guess, fresh at the time. And I started posting stuff online, tracks that I was making. And then also started playing gigs in the local scene, and eventually started garnering my own students. Excuse me. So, which would like come in for a session, and I would teach them about Fruity Loops, or at the time I had actually just bought Cubase. I think it was Cubase 5 or Cubase 6 at the time. So I started teaching very kind of basic music production lessons with Cubase, also with Serum, which I'd started learning. And eventually I got to the point where I didn't really have the time. I kind of had too many students and not enough time for the extra hours while I was kind of working the job and stuff. So I had the idea of like making a video. And so people, if they'd say, how do I do this? I could just send them the link and just send them the link rather than having to do the lesson 100 times. You do it once and you can send it to 100 people. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this is a brainwave, you know? So I did the lesson and I posted it on YouTube, and like within a few days, I think it had like a couple of thousand views. And I was like, whoa, holy shit. Okay, this is something.
What year was this that you were doing that?
So I don't quite remember, because I actually started the YouTube channel very long ago while I was working in the music shop. And I would like post a video of like me playing on a synth or random nonsense, you know? So I don't really have a good idea of when exactly I started posting the good content, because I have removed some of it and reposted some of it and stuff. But I would guess it was probably about 5 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, that was when I like posted the first like big one, when I realized like, okay, actually, you know, this is something that I could like dedicate time to.
Yeah.
And so actually, at the time, I also had a second side hustle, where I was making DIY vape liquid. I see you vaping there, so you probably...
I've made it all myself. I know
that.
exactly what you're talking about with the scales, the flavors. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So at the time, also the scene was very kind of... it was still starting out and stuff, so there wasn't much industry around it. So I was kind of making a little bit of a side hustle, doing that as well. So I was like, you know what? Like, I could do this side hustle and really push the YouTube thing and just like leave the job. And like in retrospect, it's probably such a crazy idea because like it was an absolute leap of faith. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
An absolute leap of faith. And like I was just pondering on this idea for a while. And I'd have customers come in who were like famous musicians in the local area. And I would tell them my idea. And they were like, you know what, dude? Take the jump. You got to just take the jump. You got to do it. Because like one day you're going to think, why didn't I do it? You know? And I was like, okay. Then I like signed my resignation and handed it in. And I was like, now I've got nothing to lose. I got to just like do the content.
Wow, you did it. That's crazy. That's a jump.
That's what Dash told me. He personally told me the same advice. He said, Patreon worked for me, so just do it. Like, and that's what inspired me to go on my journey.
Wow.
So.
Did that almost feel like probably scary at the same time, but almost in a weird way relieving, right? Because you sign this paper, you give it over, and then now you're on your own 100%. It's up to you. You are your boss, right? You set your hours. You set how much work you do. It's all on you. If you succeed, that's great. If you fail, but that's also on you. That's got to be a crazy feeling to feel, right?
Yeah. So I won't lie. There were a couple of like scrapes along the way. So like a couple of months, I had to sell gear just to like make it through. But I was super lucky in that I'd worked in the music field in shops specifically. So I kind of built up like more gear than I kind of needed. So, you know, that wasn't too much of a knock. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, we made it.
Wow. So was there a point where like, so after you turn in that letter and then you're grinding, and then is there a certain point where almost, I guess the graph on this whole thing, if that makes any sense, where it starts to take off and you're like, holy crap, this actually did work. Like this is actually my job now. Like how long from when you send that resignation till you felt that feeling?
So I guess it's difficult to look back because I guess there's been a couple of pivots along the way. I guess one of the big ones was Vital, like just Vital existing. Because the serum content that I did, I guess there was a lot of stuff out there, right? So I didn't really push myself to really get to the deepest level because I knew that there was already content out there where the people had already got to that point, you know? But when Vital came out, I was like, I could be that guy, you know what I mean? I could do that video that goes to that deep level. It's
funny. I think of you when I think about Vital. It's interesting. I don't know if anybody's ever told you that, but
synonymous. Yeah, for sure.
I get it a lot. Yeah. I get it a lot. I wish they would think of the developer.
I know, right?
Right. It's just weird how that turns out. But anytime we search Vital, I always see your stuff come up, and it's interesting because you do, I guess, things that are kind of out of the box. Like it's not basic patches, like how to do this. Like you actually make people think and give good ideas. And you're like, wow, you almost reinvent the wheel of how, if that's a weird term to say, but like you basically make us think about different possibilities we can do in synths, because they all kind of basically do the same thing, right? There's designing sound, obviously, but like there's some weird techniques to do. I'm like, holy crap, I've never thought about doing that.
And it's not just Vital. I mean, every synth that he covers, I'm almost like, it's so eye-opening. Phase Plant included. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I've never thought of doing it like that. And yeah, you've opened my eyes up to many things. So thank you.
Yeah. And there's a question that, so I made a video a little bit ago about what people's desert island synths are, right? And a lot of people have interesting opinions to share. So instead of just one, so you mentioned first Serum, right? For your journey, I think we all can remember the day we got Serum, right? That's kind of an iconic day in all of our lives. And then Vital as well. So like, in exception to those, is there any other three synths that you kind of go for? Or is it kind of just like, I'll pick whatever I'm in the mood for, whatever fits the track the best? Or is there three synths that you're like, these are my guys?
So I would say Phase Plant, just because it can do basically everything.
Yeah.
To be honest, lately, as much as I love Vital and like it is, and it'll always be the one, because it's free and it's so accessible, I find myself using it a bit less because a lot of the things that it can do, I can do in Phase Plant. So if you had to put a gun to my head and say, choose one of these, I would go with Phase Plant just because of the features. Right. But if money was the option, like Vital would be the obvious choice because it's free.
Yeah.
I would personally choose Serum just because there's a couple of things in there that just make patching a little bit quicker. like the multi filters and certain things like that, you can get some really crazy sounds really quickly. And as much as like you can go a few steps further in Vital, Serum is just so good for that, like quick saw lead, quick, just quick lead, quick anything. It's just really, really good for that. Also, the wavetable editor, I think, doesn't quite get as much love as it deserves. There's certain things there that it can still do that a lot of the other wavetable editors still can't do, like remove fundamental and that kind of thing. I guess it's a simple process with EQs, but just like extra stuff like that is really cool in Serum. So I find myself using the combination of Serum's wavetable editor with Phase Plant for the more advanced effects and that kind of stuff. And I would say the third choice would probably be Current, just because it's a bit
interesting.
Weird.
I haven't used that one yet.
Stuff there that's like kind of different. I guess it would probably be a tough choice between Pigments and Current, because those two are very different to the other options. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And it would be a tough choice between the two. I'd probably go with Current, just because it's got like a couple of extra things like the chord generators, the ARPs, and the effects are really, really crazy. And yeah, so that's my long.
It's so interesting that you say that, because a lot of people who maybe I get asked this question a lot, like, why would you choose Serum when Vital exists, or why would you use Serum? And I mean, Serum to me is the alpha and the omega for some reason. It's just like everything you'd possibly need. He did it in just one single version. I mean, obviously he's iterated it, we're at, how a couple betas later, but it still is the fastest workflow. It has the cleanest sound. The filters are the best.
Yeah, the filters are pretty good. That is true.
It's what, 12 years old at this point or something like that? I mean,
2014, right, when it came out. Is that right?
Okay, so yeah, 10. We're reached a decade. But no,
Wow,
I do agree with
crazy.
you. Current is an amazing synthesizer, and they totally nailed it right out of the gate. And yes, we had the launch debacle, but after that, and when the dust has settled, like I go back to Current, like, wow, this is such a great synthesizer, and it offers things that the other synthesizers that you mentioned do not do. But yeah, I mean, they each have their place. All four of those synthesizers that we mentioned all have wavetables on them, and they're wavetable synthesizers, but they, to the more advanced user, they do completely different things.
Yeah, like what is since I haven't used Current yet, everyone's kind of talking about it as the big thing, right? So what's the main selling point you say for that one? Like what makes that one, I guess, different from either Pigments or Serum? Like why would someone want to get that one? Because I kind of do, like, it's just I hate that word, the gas, right? Gear acquisition syndrome. Like I want to get it. I have to have it at some point. I have to collect it. But like if someone's kind of like looking like, I don't know if I should get this one or this one, what's the sell on Current?
I would say for me, like, it's a couple of things. One of them is the effects. So not only is each effects system insanely cool, like Morph EQ is ridiculous. For anything from just basic EQ stuff to full-on modal physical modeling to all sorts of crazy stuff. The chorus that's even built in there, you can like turn it into a reverb, you can do all sorts of stuff. But each of the effects can be stacked multiple times. So you can, for example, take their OTT, which is the fuse compressor, and just stack it 9 times, for example.
Damn.
Like, whereas Vital, you can only do one of the compressor, or one in Serum, one of the compressor, etc. I don't know why you would need 9 OTTs, but that's just
you never
one
know.
example. Exactly. For me, the thing is like having multiple reverbs or multiple delays, because then you can modulate between them. A thing that I really enjoy doing is modulating between multiple different delays, because then you get like this rhythmic thing as well as this spacey thing. Whereas with stuff like Vital, it's super complex to do that kind of thing, because you have to actually modulate the times to very specific values, and it becomes like a very involving process. Whereas with Current, it's like, okay, choose these 2 effects, modulate the mix, job's done,
Right, and the ARP, like you're saying, that's one thing with Vital that kind of takes a little bit longer. Like I remember, I was wondering, it's like how are ARPs kind of made, or sequences, and then funny enough, I stumbled upon your video, and then that's where okay, we have to get the graph into 12, and I'm like, okay, oh, that's how they do it. Okay, then you put that on the pitch. I'm like, interesting. So I kind of see what you're saying, where like you want a nice ARP for that, but it can be done in vinyl, but it just, it takes a little bit more time, and you kind of have to think about it a little bit more. If you want to change the scale, set a couple minutes aside and then go and grab the dot and kind of move it down, and kind of so on and so forth, right?
So that's the kind of thing also there with Current is there's a arpeggiator system which has a really cool kind of random gate built in, just a single knob that you can kind of turn to get random gates, as well as, random different melodic patterns and that kind of thing. So it's these kinds of things you can do with Vital using the mod remaps and all sorts of complex stuff. But just the fact that it's a single knob, job's done. They've thought about a lot of these kinds of things, which I think are used often with modern music. And it just makes the workflow a little bit better, I think.
How are the filters? Are they pretty good?
Absolutely insane. Yeah. That would be my next reason to sell to get the thing is the filters are really, really good. Specifically the comb filter, actually.
Yes, that's a big thing. Yeah, not every comb filter is the same. Like the one in Zebra is extraordinarily good. Hive is pretty cool too as well. But yeah, that's a good point that you brought up comb filters, because not every synthesizer makes the comb filters the same, right? Some are a little bit different. Like it's easy to make some string stuff in Zebra, for example. But other ones, it's kind of like you have to struggle with it just a little bit more.
One example is something I'm going to pull from a video I did not so long ago on Current, where it's actually a concept that's taken from quite a common patch in the Eurorack modular world, which is a granular synth through a resonator and then being processed. So the whole idea is that Current has a granular oscillator, and then the comb filters can basically, that's a resonator, right? So essentially what you're doing is you're using the granular synth to generate particles, and then you're resonating each of the particles with the comb filter. So you're creating a kind of pad, kind of drone type of thing with any type of granular noise. But then furthermore, because of like the way that Morph EQ is so advanced, you can just add as many nodes and modulate them as you want. You can kind of change the partials of the resonance of the comb filter. So you know how comb filters have that kind of the frequencies that are like
they're boosted.
The different harmonics. You can actually just remove them using Morph EQ.
Whoa.
And like modulate it and whatever. So it's stuff like this, which is like, it's you can do in all sorts of other more advanced synths, but the fact that it's like 3 kind of semi-simple processes to get this more modern sound design technique, I think that's really cool.
Damn, well, Minimal Audio is going to love this episode. We should definitely consider having Jake on the show. Wow. So, you mentioned modular synthesis. I know you're really into modular. So how do you incorporate modular into your workflow? And the follow-up question with that would, when are we going to see the Dash Klish ambient album?
So I guess it's a difficult question. I kind of go through stages with the modular where I'll try to build a kind of live performance system where I could kind of like perform an entire show's worth of music or something. And then I kind of like scrap that idea and go into the kind of more sound design territory. But it's a weird thing where I kind of keep it very disconnected from my usual music production world, because I find that you can often get very lost in, I guess, like in the translation of the sound, like sending it MIDI. Now I'm going to send it a MIDI pattern. Whereas if you're just exploring the wires and making weird drones and stuff and recording them as samples, you can then just pitch that sample how you want or granularize it or whatever the case is. And I'm finding myself having better results doing that, as opposed to trying to connect. I see a lot of modular artists, specifically with Bitwig, that have like a multi-channel MIDI output, multi-channel audio input, and then they'll actually have the project with oscillators running live in the project like they would with a plugin. But for me, it doesn't really work so well, because I guess also because I change projects very often. Like I go through like 3 or 4 projects at a time. So I guess that wouldn't work in that regard. But also, my production process is very different to my sound design process. My production process can be quite chaotic at times, whereas my sound design process, I guess, is a little bit more methodical. So when they clash, it can kind of like it can kind of sound a bit cacophonous. Mm-hmm. So like, for example, like I'll have something that I've really meticulously crafted, like a bass sound and a kick sound. Mm-hmm. And then the moment I try to incorporate a sound live from the Eurorack, it gets lost in translation kind of thing. Whereas if I just scrap the idea of running a DAW and just plug my headphones directly into the modular synth and just start making weird noises while it's recording and then listen to that afterwards, just listening to that moment of time, I guess maybe it's a nostalgic thing. It's kind of like reminding me of the moment I had with the machine. But I start to quickly get inspired by these little pieces of audio that I hear in the sample, as opposed to trying to like line up the MIDI and, all that kind of stuff.
Do you use VCV rack or voltage or anything like that? Do those kind of translate, or is it kind of like, now I have my modular and my DAW, but is there something different about those two? I'm sure there is.
Yeah, the biggest difference I would say between VCV rack and actual modular is polyphony. Mm-hmm. And another one is patch recall. So like the thing I hate the most is removing all the patch cables. If I have like an idea or an inspiration or something that I want to try, I will see, will it work in VCV rack first, because you can quickly throw something together. And I'm like, okay, this is going somewhere. And then I'll kind of develop that further in the analog domain.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Have you tried voltage?
I have. I explored voltage modular quite a bit. Although, to be fair, now that I've been exploring, or now that I'm fully on the Bitwig train, Bitwig Grid has pretty much replaced VCV rack and voltage modular for me.
Mm-hmm. I do want to ask you about Bitwig, because there's a part of me, God, it's hard to say this, but there's a part of me that I downloaded the demo and I'm like, this is pretty cool. And when you're switching DAWs, I'm sure you've done it before. Like it's hard to learn the new key commands, and you can't like go from your old DAW and say like, why doesn't my old DAW, or why doesn't this new DAW do what my old one does? You kind of have to leave that past a little bit behind and then adapt to the new workflow. And there's a part of me that really wants to try Bitwig, especially because of the grid, because that's something I want to get lost in. And what did you use something before that, right? Like was it Fruity Loops and then Bitwig for you, or did you have something before that?
I was on Cubase for quite a few years, actually.
Okay, so how was that process going from Cubase to Bitwig? Like, was it a month process where you kind of start feeling comfortable and you can do whatever you want to do?
So I guess it was like, I think about 5 months. So actually, rewind, when I was working in the music shop many years ago, the local importer of Bitwig actually gave me a beta version of Bitwig 1, like before it was launched, like many, many years ago. And like I tried that out, and I actually made a quick like video that I posted onto YouTube like maybe 10 years ago or something, or 11 years ago, long deleted. But so I'd first tried it out back then, and it always been in the back of my mind, like there was a couple of things in that door that was super promising. So I always followed the development. But around, I think, version 4, it really hooked my excitement with their introduction of the note grid, because that's like the modular system specifically for MIDI. So like transforming MIDI stuff. So you can make MIDI sequences, modulation systems, all in the modular domain. And coming from Cubase, which is like very much focused on the old school linear DAW, just record audio in. Then even the MIDI is unstable in Cubase. Coming from a DAW like that to something where you can create your own sequences with modular components and stuff, it was super inspiring. But the first few months, like the first, I'd say 5 months or so, from when I first decided I was going to do it till I was actually comfortable, it was quite a struggle, but only because I was trying to, I guess, incorporate ideas from, like workflow ideas from Cubase into Bitwig. And so only once I'd completely like removed myself from Cubase and said like, I'm not going to open any more projects. Those are all done. I'm just going to fully make the switch and dedicate time to learning, like relearning the workflow. Then it started to get more comfortable. Certain things started to make sense. Yeah, so when I was still, when you're comparing two DAWs, the workflow things can be very weird to compare because it's like, I like this thing that this does.
Yep.
And I'm not quite sure if I like this thing that this does yet. But it's because it hasn't become a part of your workflow yet. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. I experienced that yesterday. Sorry to interrupt. I experienced that yesterday. I work in Ableton, almost exclusively, as you guys know. And then for the stuff we do with Ascendant, I've started working in Logic. And those two couldn't be more apples to oranges. I mean, they're completely different DAWs. And I found myself getting a little frustrated in Logic because in things in Ableton, I can do super fast. But I know that Logic has its strengths. It's just a matter of just adapting to it and learning the language of the DAW, and then everything becomes easier. But it does take time. It's a process that you go through. Anyway,
it's interesting how people choose certain different DAWs, and like it's cool now how there's not really. There shouldn't be any DAW wars anymore, right? Because at one point in time, some were better at this thing, some were better at that thing. But it's kind of come to the point where they're all pretty good at this point. But that one thing about Bitwig is very interesting. I think, I guess if there's anybody watching that wants to switch a DAW or something like that, what kind of advice would you give someone? Because that's a hard thing to leave an old one and go to a new one. And why would someone do that too?
I would say the biggest, I guess for me, not advice, but the biggest comparison would be how much are the third-party plugins carrying the actual DAW. Because at the point when I kind of made the switch, I had thousands of plugins on my hard drive currently being loaded every time I opened the project. And kind of as I'm using Bitwig more and more, I'm doing most of the stuff with the built-in stuff or one or two extra third-party libraries like the Kiloheart stuff or Melda stuff. But I mean, there's so many features that are kind of like built around the environment, I guess, the modulation system and all that can achieve what a lot of other plugins offer. So, for example, you can create any type of multiband process because, is it Waves? I think Waves has a multiband transient shaper. There's a few companies that have one. But you can just take any transient shaper and just load it into the multiband effect and make a multiband transient shaper, for example. So you can make a lot of the stuff that exists on the market just using the built-in stuff. And there's a lot of presets in the library that do it already. So one of the biggest things for me was like, I don't need this plugin anymore because not only can I do it, but there's a preset that replaces it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow, that's interesting. So you can build your whole thing and then save that as a preset, basically.
Yeah.
Jeez, yeah. I think one of these days I'm going to have to make that jump. It's scary though, Dash. Seriously, it's a scary thing, right? Like, it sounds awful saying it's scary for like a DAW, but it is, man. Like you spend so much time in one and then you just hop over the next one.
It's one of those things, like, I guess it's not any time. It's like, for example, with if you've been using a specific DAW for a certain amount of years, it's money that you've actually invested in it. So it's like a painful thing to actually like give up on something that you've invested hard-earned cash on, Yeah, but I would say it's, just go with it and try it out and see how it goes, The biggest thing for me was to just make sure that like any projects that were open, I just completed before I actually made the step. Any kind of content that I was busy doing in Cubase, I finished before making the step. So I didn't have the urge to like open Cubase again before I could just like make the dive completely.
It's interesting how it has to be almost like you have to almost divorce your previous DAW. It's like, I'm leaving you in the past. We're no longer going to work together.
It's not you, it's me.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And then you just have to move on.
It is like that, because like as musicians, there's a lot of process that we rely on to fulfill like our creative vocabulary. For example, like whether it's presets, whether it's certain workflow things. And if one tool doesn't offer us, I've seen this in myself while producing. I'll be like, oh, I have an idea. Let me open something. Oh, this is not working for me. Exit tool, open a different tool. Oh, this is working for me. So rather than trying to make it work in the first one, going back to old workflow habits. And if you have the ability to go back to the old one, you'll just do that. So like if you're so for example, I'm also trying out Ableton at the moment, and I'm kind of like playing with Bitwig and Ableton. And often I'll be playing in Ableton, I'll be like, oh, it doesn't do the thing that I wanted to do right now. I just open Bitwig and do it there because there's a process that I remember from there. But I'm sure that there's 100 ways to do it in Ableton. You know?
So John wanted to ask, are there any plugins that you regret buying along the lines of,
Yeah, that's a hot topic, believe it or not. yeah, it really is, because it's weird. Mine was Sakura. Yeah, so I don't know what yours was. If there's like, and maybe it doesn't have to be a paid one, I guess. I mean, it could be, but if it's a free one where you get this, you're like, what? Why did I get this and install this? Right? I'm kind of curious what you have there.
So, a couple of the acoustic audio stuff I bought, and it's not that it's bad. It's just that I don't use it because there's so much bloatware that's involved with it. I don't know if you guys saw the whole thing about 10 gigs of extra bloatware just for their DRM software and stuff. And yeah, so I don't end up using the software just because it's too bloaty. And I'm not going to have like 10 different compressors that are each like 50 gigs. It's just whole hardware full. Not happening. So I kind of regret that because they're not cheap either. And I also regret maybe doing a couple of videos where I recommended them because I don't use them as much anymore. So that's, I guess, another thing about being a content creator is like, there's often these situations where like, there's like, hey, there's this thing. I'm really loving it right now. And then like 2-3 years down the line, you're like, I'm not loving it so much anymore. Sorry, guys. Yeah. And like, you kind of feel bad about it. But I guess like we just telling the truth as to what we know at the time, So like I was loving it at the time. But now they have actually released a statement saying they're going to like sort something out. They're going to try to remove some of the bloatware. So now I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not so, maybe I will give it another shot. Let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
I mean, I get that. I mean, it's my computer is I try to keep it as optimal as I can. And if there's something that I don't use, I'll uninstall it because there's no reason to have it on there. And then I see a lot of posts every so often, usually on different Reddit threads where people are like, I'm cleaning it. I'm doing some spring cleaning on my hard drive and getting all this stuff out there and it feels so much better. Pick your good EQs that you like, maybe 1 or 2 or something like that you can rely on, a compressor or 2 that you rely on. Maybe your main synths and some effects. And at the end of the day, that's all you really need because you don't need all these million plugins out there to write something good. It's really on you, how you use your tools, right? If you're stuck with 1 or 2 synthesizers, you're going to force to be good with them.
Yeah, that's it. I guess it's like a lot of the time when I didn't realize that I was like not super happy with the quality of the tools that were in the DAW that I had at the time. So I was kind of compensating with third-party plugins. So I'd buy a bunch of those. And now I find myself not needing to compensate as much because the tools are either good enough or allow you the possibility to make them better inside Bitwig. So I just don't find myself using as many of the tools, I guess. The Wave stuff is another example. It's like, it's not super bad or anything. It's just that like, I just don't have a use for them anymore. So I don't even bother installing them on the new PC.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Yeah, I try to do that myself. Just kind of minimalist, I guess. Spring cleaning. That's cool. You can actually make your tools better in Bitwig. That's unheard of for me, right? The tool is the tool. How you're like, make those a little bit better. I'm going to do it one day. I swear to God.
That's how it should be.
You heard it here first.
Along those lines, I think that's, some really good advice for beginning producers. Like, use what you have. I always tell that to people, like the best synth is the one that's right in front of you. Yeah. But along those same lines, what are some tips of advice that you wish that you knew when you first started your journey, that now that you wish you knew when you first started?
Ooh, that's a tough one. That's such a tough one. I guess it's the biggest one is that advice is always a guideline. I see specifically in the music production thing, people are very specific with numbers and like, oh, now I need to compress the bass. Now I need a sub under the kick, and now I need a this, and now I need a that. Rather than just kind of like observing the context, people are kind of hyper-focusing on like following the tutorials. And I think for me as a creator, for me, the message is not only just like follow the tutorial, it's also like try find inspiration in it. That's why I also try to do a lot of like the weirder tutorials. It's not just like how to make a Skrillex bass, you know, it's like, it's something that's going to like inspire somebody to like maybe think differently about the plugin that they have, or maybe it'll inspire a developer to make a plugin that does the thing, or who knows. But I feel like even for myself, when I first started, when I was studying audio engineering, when I studied, there was a lot of things that were taught to us that now are completely wrong. So, for example, it's like in the analog realm, on an analog console, you were taught like never boost an EQ, rather cut and boost the gain of the channel or the volume of the channel, because boosting an analog EQ can create harmonic distortion. So a lot of people will say like they'll watch a tutorial or something of a guy mixing a band on an analog console, and he'll say like, oh, never boost the mids. And then that kind of misinformation will permeate a little bit, and people will miss the opportunity to boost the mids in a digital EQ, and maybe use that as a sound design thing because it's illegal or it's the wrong thing to do because they saw it in a tutorial or something like that. And I guess maybe I'm guilty too, because I've got content out there saying like, this is the way you have to do it. But the message more is that like, I want to just inspire people to do it rather than that there is one way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah. Like I see those posts where it's like, all your stuff has to peak at -6. And if it goes above that, it's going to be wrong. It's like, not really. I mean, it's all in the context. At the end of the day, if it sounds good, it's okay, right? There's guidelines, sure, that you kind of want to do, right? I mean, on every input list, you're going to see the kick drum is going to be first. That's kind of just standardized, but it's like, you should learn when to kind of break those things. Or when people say, you can't mix like this, you have to mix like this. Like there's cultural things that we do, like kick bass and kind of build everything off the drums and add the layers and synths, put the vocal on top kind of thing. But some people do it completely different. Some people start with the vocal and it's like, not how I do it, but hey, if they get good results, that's fine. There's not really like a concrete rule like that.
I think also sometimes like breaking one or two of the rules can help to create a sound or an aesthetic or part of your artistic sound, you know, like for example, like Aphex Twin does like everything wrong, but at the same time, it all sounds right, you know? Yeah. And classical composers will be like, yes, they'll analyze his works like as if it were a classical composition and that kind of thing. But he's broken a lot of the rules. And I think the magic is that like, there's a lot of rules in there that he's followed, but he's like picked one or two to like break tastefully, you know? And so I think that's one thing that I try to do is to like follow a bunch of rules and then just like break one or two so that it's like, this sounds like a normal song, but what is this weird sound? Does that make sense?
Right. And especially in the sound design realm too.
Context, you know, because it's like, it's not going to sound weird if it's all just white noise, you know? But if it sounds like a normal song and there's just one weird noise, it's going to be like, what is going on here? You know?
Well, how did you make that?
Contrast.
Is there a tutorial on that?
You know, speaking of tutorials, us three, as all of our viewers know, we all work in the music tutorial space. I had a question for you regarding, you know, the future of your channel and content. How do you feel, first of all, what drives you as a content creator? to keep putting out new tutorials and new material? And then how do you see, number one, the music tutorial space on YouTube in general, and then how do you see that shaping up with the future of your channel?
So I try not to think too far in the future because things can change so quickly. New plugins come out and new techniques. I get inspired by new techniques like on the daily. So I try not to think too far in advance. I guess I also get like waves of creativity where I'll sit and like over a couple of days, I'll make like 5 tutorials that are kind of like in a sequence, you know what I mean? But then sometimes I won't feel too inspired and I'll kind of just sit and work on my own music for a couple of days after that. And then I'll have a chance to kind of like release those few videos over the next 2 weeks or so. And that gives me a chance to kind of like, to weather the drought, so to speak. So that when I get inspired again, I can kind of like catch the wave, you know? I feel like the important thing, specifically with like being a content creator or creative in general, is to like try and not set too big of a goal. So for example, don't say like, oh, my goal is to be a millionaire or to have a mansion in the hills or to drive a Ferrari or whatever it is, to have 1 million followers or whatever. Rather think on a micro level. Think, okay, my goal is to finish this track, you know? Because I feel like so many people get caught in the bigger picture and so many of us struggle to finish the track. Do you know what I mean? Or finish the album or just EQ the bass or, you know, so I try to think on the smaller goals, you know, like edit this current video that I'm working on and think about the next one. I do obviously have like a general sort of progression that I'm heading towards, but I also like to let my community kind of guide me in that regard. So the example is that as much as myself, I love Current and I'm using it a lot, I can see that not too many of my community members or viewers have Current. So there's no point in me spending the next 6 months putting out 1 million videos on Current. And it's the same thing with Bitwig as well. You know, like I love Bitwig and I will always put out content for it. But it's important for me to kind of come back to Serum and come back to Vital because I know that like that's what most of the people who watch my videos have and use. So I find often when I create a goal that's too far in the future, I can kind of sometimes forget the important thing, you know. And so I'll be like grinding away trying to do something and forget that like the viewers just want to see the good Vital shit, you know.
Yeah, it's weird how that works out like that.
Do you find that frustrating as a creator? Like, because you've pretty much laid the gauntlet down as far as Vital tutorial videos go. Do you find it like you just feeling like, I don't want to do another Vital video? I've pretty much covered every aspect of the synth there is to cover. Or do you find that like once you sit on it long enough, something new will open up and you'll find a new creative way to use the synth?
I guess sometimes it's like, sometimes I go through stages where I don't feel too inspired to go back to it, but sometimes it feels refreshing, you know, like so one example is going back to Serum over the past few months has been super refreshing because I haven't really touched it in so long. I'm able to apply a lot of the new things that I've learned through exploring Vital and Faceplant into Serum. So there's a lot of new techniques and stuff that I was able to apply and obviously get new results.
That's great. Wow.
There's one thing I wanted to ask you on the last thing you were saying is when you're zooming in and trying to finish the track, right? This is something that I've personally struggled with for a while. I think I'm getting better at it, but I think a lot of people also struggle with this as well. Where you know those times where you're sitting in your DAW and things kind of just magically get put together. It feels good. You got 8 or 16 bars. I think you know where I'm going with this. And then you're like, where do I go? How do I make this a track? This sounds cool, but no one wants to listen to a 16 bar loop for over and over and over. Then you listen to it again and again, and then you kind of start losing the excitement for it. because it's not exciting, right? You're kind of overstimulated. And then you close the session and do something else, and people pile up those sessions. How do you deal with things like that?
I guess so. I used to actually struggle a lot with hoarding projects, and then I started doing. This is actually something I heard in a Mr. Bill podcast, actually, where he talked about doing a stock take of his projects, where he went through his hard drive and every single project, put in an Excel document, the BPM, the tempo, and what still needs to be done, and one by one go through and finish it. And so what you end up is with a list, and like one project is like in F minor, still needs a bass line. And then you go down the list and another one is in like F minor, has a sick bass line. And you're like, oh, wait, yeah, you just put these two together and you got a track with a sick bass line. Do you know what I mean?
Wow.
And there's so many connected dots that end up happening when you do those kind of stock take things where it's like, oh, there's this loop from this project that would actually work in this project that's just missing a loop, and these kinds of things. And I kind of did that once or twice. And now, since doing that, I kind of just try work more methodically instead of opening up a session and throwing ideas at the wall. I try to throw ideas at the wall before opening the session. So I just record loops and make samples and make all sorts of weird things, compile libraries. And so when the session comes, I'm already like, this is a thing I want to use in the song. This is a thing that's going to work. Does that kind of make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I know what I want to do after the show. I'm going to go make a spreadsheet and start. Because I mean, as somebody who makes tutorials, like you have those things where you build up to a point. You're like, okay, that's cool, and you put it away in a folder, and then that just piles up. You got 50 tracks that are just sitting there, and they're just collecting digital dust, really.
And the craziest thing is that,
too.
Yeah, the craziest thing is that what'll happen is like, I had a track that was in a key, but it just needed a breakdown or variation. And then I had another track that was like a break beatsy kind of thing. It was in the same key, same tempo. And I just like took that, bounced out the main part, and used it as a breakdown in the other track. And it was like, boom, done. I was like, oh, okay. And so it's like these, yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool. So a lot of people know you for just being a Psytrance producer, and I know you probably don't like that label. People call me an ambient producer, but I can produce much more than ambient. What other genres are you interested in, and have you ever produced anything outside of Psytrance?
I'm interested in so many different styles of music. For me, it's less about a kind of specific genre and more about an artist, I guess. Obviously, like Psytrance is my main passion, but I actually listen to mainly like hip hop, trip hop, breaks, and that kind of thing. Like just like when I'm easy listening and that kind of thing. And I have like quite a vast background in like punk bands, metal bands, and so I kind of vary. I go through stages. I'm actually considering like doing a bit of a pivot. So I've basically almost completed my next Psytrance album. And then like I'm considering doing some kind of pivot. I'm not quite sure yet, but not trying to not be within any particular genre, just be like electronic music. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
Because I feel like that that style of music is so much more accessible. And I guess for me, it's just like, I just want to spread the music, spread the vibes, you know what I mean? So like, I guess a lot of people have this, there's a connotation to specific genres, when people think Psytrance, they think, I'm not into that hippie stuff or whatever it is, or whatever the case is with any type of music, there's specific connotations that I guess people have in their mind, and they wouldn't listen to it based on their like pre-decided idea of what it would be like. And I guess just being labeled as like electronic music or something like that opens the doors for people to open their own minds, you know what I mean, and listen to things.
Yeah.
Man, that's a good point. That's a dubstep thing for me, right? Because when I first started, I'm like, what is this? Like, I didn't understand it. And then once you get more into synthesizers, you're like, wow, that's amazing how they did that. And it's almost, you open this door and you see the artwork behind all that. Because I mean, some of these patches and some of those songs is insane, and how they all work together. A lot of FM going on, and making FM, as I'm sure we all know, it's kind of difficult to make something sound really good, right? It's easy to make a bad sound in FM, right? So when you listen to these songs, it's kind of almost inspiring to kind of wonder how they made these kind of sounds. Which brings me to a question for you: is that there's different sounds that are easier to make for others. Like for me, basses aren't really that difficult. Some people, leads are hard for them. Like, what's the hardest sound for you to synthesize?
Ooh, I guess it's a tough question because as much as like I'd say bass is easy to synthesize, like I've spent the last 10 years doing it every day and I'm still finding new techniques, you know?
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So I guess not new techniques, but it's like I still feel like I could fine tune it a bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But the thing I do find the hardest is kind of more percussive, spacey sounds. So like, I'm trying to think of an example now. There's a specific kind of glassy sound that Virus TI can make, and it's very hard to like replicate in other digital synths. So I guess like technically that would probably be the hardest because there was one thing that could do it and nobody's been able to recreate it since.
Interesting. Man.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's things that I enjoy making. Obviously, pad soundscapes are one of my stronger suits, but when it comes to, filling things out in the upper register, making really creative stuff, like it's harder for me I have to really think about it. And where I should probably just let it go, I should probably just like, plug in a bunch of cables and VCV rack and just try to do it. But, sometimes things take a little bit more thought and care, on a technical level.
And I'm wondering if you had the same experience too, Dash. So you said you went to school for learning engineering, right? So I did the same thing too back in 2012. And looking back, probably not the wisest decision, but that's in the past. It's all good. Moving forward from that, I feel that I learned more diving into synthesizers and reading DSP books and manuals than I ever did at a class. Is that something that you also faced as well?
Absolutely. So I guess in audio engineering, you learn the fundamentals. Like you learn like what is a compressor, what are frequencies, how sound works, like how the audio volume is like logarithmic or whatever the case is. You learn the fundamentals, but they don't teach you the saw wave where the filter goes brr. Do you know what I mean? And that's the kind of thing that I guess most modern sound people want to know. So yeah, like for me, it was cool, and like the information was good, but it wasn't very practical because I still found myself like at square one. Like, okay, I still need to figure this all out by myself. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a lot of self homework that you have to do, and I'm kind of wondering, is there certain moments where things kind of just click? Like I remember a specific one for me when I was reading a DSP book, and it was like, every sound we hear can be broken up to sine waves in different phases and different pitches. And that's one of those times where I'm like, wow, that's, and then once you kind of know that, then sound design becomes a little bit easier. Do you have anything like that, or maybe advice that someone gave you that kind of, one of those aha moments where you kind of level up, right? Because we plateau often, but something kind of like that.
Yeah, that particular one, the Harmonic series representation of the saw wave was like one, that thing you're talking about now was one big light bulb moment for me. But also, I guess, related to that is the theory of intervals, so that like we generally hear sound based on its intervals. So if you remove any of those partials in the harmonic series, you won't be able to tell audibly that there's a missing partial because you have intervals in the other partials. And so what that means is like you can just remove one partial and replace it with something else, and the sound won't exist, and so there won't be any kind of EQ clashing or anything like that. And the reason that this is significant is because specifically for like a kick and a bass sound, if you remove the single fundamental partial of a harmonic series, which is represented by a saw wave, you still hear the same sound. It's just that you don't have that low sub. And when you have a kick's tail already there, what happens then is you're just replacing the fundamental that you've removed from the saw wave with the sub of the kick. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. You're going to get a stronger
you no longer have
kick
to
that
worry.
way.
Yeah, and you no longer have to worry about EQing the one because of clashing compared to the other and that kind of thing, because that frequency just doesn't exist at the same time as the other one.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it as well. I mean, do you ever dive into additive synthesis? Because that's kind of in that territory a little bit. Do you ever do that at all?
So for me, like the results that I generally get from additive synthesis, like in real time, don't quite fit the type of tones and sounds and stuff that I'm looking for. But that being said, like understanding the principles of it helped me to create better like wavetables and that kind of thing, which I use as subtractive synths. So the idea of the harmonic series and removing the fundamental thing, that is like a technique of additive synthesis. So I use that, but I don't often use an additive synth because, you know, when you start to pitch shift the partials and do all sorts of stuff like that, it starts to get a little bit too atonal. And the type of sounds that I go for are kind of a little bit more tonal, I guess.
Right. And if there's, this is, I guess, where the conversation went here, it's getting a little more technical, right? So if someone's kind of watching this and they're kind of confused of what Dash is saying, is there any places that you would recommend for people to learn all this stuff, or maybe certain tutorials you have or something that you've watched that have helped you out there? Like, where can someone go to learn this type of material?
I would say, it's one of those things where you kind of just have to like soak it in. There isn't like one source that explains it all. A lot of it can be quite easily explained, like just searching and finding the like Wikipedia article, specifically like additive synthesis and that kind of thing. There's a lot of stuff on Wikipedia that just explain it in very basic terms, and that can be like understood and represented in subtractive synths or anything like that, really.
That's a good point, especially on the Wikipedia article. That reminded me that I was on a binge of Wikipedia looking at audio stuff and in synthesis. And then one of the first recordings was, I think it's from Bell Labs or Alexander Graham Bell, right? And he recorded his voice on a wax cylinder from like the 1800s or something. And you could hear it. And it's so crazy how far back that goes. And then fast forward to our time, and we're talking about partials and harmonics and removing a fundamental to get the kick bigger. It's crazy how fast technology has gotten at this point. I mean, do you see this going any further from where we're at right now? Like, do you see maybe AI coming into this and kind of switching the game up?
So I think AI is such a vast topic on its own. You know, we could probably talk about like the ethics of it and stuff for hours. I think at this point, it's not really poised to enter the market too much. I feel like the kind of tools and stuff that AI offers at this point in time are very basic, or they're very surface level. You know, it's more just like sets of commands as opposed to actual artificial intelligence. So I'm yet to see anything that could potentially like come into the market and actually like do anything that's going to change the course of music. But I see the future of music. I'm seeing a lot of tools lately for more workflow orientated stuff like, just one example is like Scalar, being able to like quickly pull up a bunch of chords and that kind of thing. So I'm noticing like the kind of more mainstream popular music has a lot more chords and scales and that kind of stuff in it. I'm not sure if it's due to the fact that like more tools offer that kind of thing to people who wouldn't usually have access to it. So I think it's those kind of tools which are changing the way that music is being made. I mean, if we look at like modern bass music and stuff, a lot of the sound design relies very heavily on like spectral processing and vocoders. Okay, vocoders is a bit older technology, but only recently did we start seeing as advanced vocoders as like we do now. But also spectral processing is quite a recent boom, I would say. So plugins like PitchMap and that kind of thing basically spurred the kind of evolution of an entire genre, like color bass. So I think it's stuff like that, like the tools pushing new developments in sound design, which would like shape the future of music, as opposed to something like AI, because at the end of the day, the developers most of the time are musicians, you know, like the example of what's that one? Dawson Love. Mm-hmm. That's one that I've been using a lot lately. And it's just so easy. You just put it on, it just always sounds good. And it's an example, like a lot of these developers are musicians. They're into the type of music that like we're into as well. So it's most likely that they're going to make the tools that they would use to shape the future of the genre, as opposed to some code knowing what that would be or some robot knowing what that would be, you know, because a lot of these things are inspired by stuff that has happened in the past. And I think like taste is something that you can't really calculate, you know, like if we say, I want to inspire something by this little piece of history and mash it up with this sample and create like a culture mash, the taste involved in choosing those two pieces it can't be done by a robot and can't be explained by a robot, because it's the type of thing that like there's feeling involved, you know. It's that like this thing, this piece of history means something to me. This sample from culture, it reminds me of the music that I listened to as a kid. It's nostalgic. Poof, mash them together and it means something else. That robot doesn't know what that meaning is. So there's no way that AI could replace that kind of thing.
It's reassuring to hear you say that, because, you know, it's this whole new thing that's kind of captivated almost every area that we can think about. And sometimes I think we think it's like, is this technically artificial intelligence, right? Because we're giving it commands to do something, but is it actually thinking for itself? Because, you know, growing up, you see these movies like artificial intelligence, AI taking over, and it actually thinks for itself. It's like its own entity. So is that technically where it's at, or is it a thing where we give it the information and it just does the best with what it has, right? That's kind of how I see it at the moment.
I think for me, intelligence is less about like the process of thinking and more about the process of intuiting, of intuition. So it's like the robot won't just know a beat is sick because it grooves. Do you know what I mean? It's going to be like trying to calculate what the tempo is and what the key is and all these types of things. But it could just be like a burst of white noise and a sine wave and a bleep bloop, but just it happens to be at the right time, so it grooves, you know?
That is a really good point.
The robot's not going to know that, you know?
Damn, that's interesting. Chris, is there any questions you want to ask Dash?
I just have to say that was such a great answer to that question, you know, because I do feel like AI, they keep, you know, touting the fact that this is a smarter model. This is a smarter model. And we're moving towards this age where, you know, robots, as you call them, or computer, you know, machine learning models are getting smarter. But at the same time, the real gold mine is in the feeling and the depth and the intuitive nature that we have as human beings to contextualize not only our history, but music itself. And that's something that I think we're probably pretty far off of. But I think we'll see in the next 5-10 years, you know, those two things sort of coming closer together as the intelligence gets more accurate and as our ability to use these tools gets more, you know, in our hands and it, you know, gets into the hands of real musicians. We're going to see a huge wave of just new tools coming out and new ways to express ourselves. And hopefully, like we've discussed, you know, it'll be more in not only just creating the music, but the ways that we create music, you know, giving us opportunities to create music in different and unique ways, things that we haven't even thought of yet. I think that's the real excitement of the future for me.
I think if the power is grasped, it can be used effectively. So like my example is like in AI art, something like Midjourney or ChatGPT, you have to supply it with a prompt. And the prompt is essentially a piece of culture or something that you've thought of. It's your intuition, and it's supplying its database of knowledge. So the crutch in the system is complemented by you supplying that piece of intuition by giving it the prompt. And I feel like, and then furthermore, like you could then take that image as inspiration and then paint a picture or whatever the case is. Something that I've seen used quite effectively in the art sphere is artists using AI to generate multiple different compositions of an idea that they have. So they can see, like, instead of painting it 100 times, they'd be like, I want to see it from 100 different angles. And then, okay, this is the best one, paint this one. Does that make sense? And I've seen tattoo artists use this quite effectively as well. There's quite a few apps that can do this kind of thing, like quickly mock up different tattoo things and stuff, which they then put their own artistry on top of. And so I feel like there are tools that exist in music, like the Audio Modern sequencers. They're smart randoms. I believe there's a bit of some kind of machine learning sprinkled in there where it reads your preset database and makes choices based on what it thinks you will choose based on your presets. And then you can actually even go in there and choose which presets you like the most and stuff. And so, again, it's not true intuition and true intelligence because you're still supplying it with that intuition of like, this is the preset I like. You know what I mean?
Wow. Damn, that is really interesting. I do have one more question for you, Dash. So if someone is starting off their journey, they want to become a sound designer, make some patches. And I remember how hard it was, right? You know, what synth do you pick? How do you make this? What are all these buttons and knobs doing all that? I was pretty happy with starting with Serum. I thought it was a good synth to really kind of understand stuff visually. But now things have evolved quite a bit. So what would you recommend to a beginner who's like, I want to get into this, I have a little bit of money to spend. What synthesizer should be my first one to kind of learn the fundamentals?
Personally, I would say spend the money on like headphones or monitors and go with Vital and Reaper until you can afford the license. But just because I feel like the monitoring, hearing what you're doing is more important than what tool you're using. And by the time you get to the point where you're spending money on plugins, you will understand that. Do you know what I mean? So like, for example, if somebody's got like budget headphones, you know, there's no point in buying a plugin that resynthesizes the subs of something because they're not going to hear what it's doing on the budget headphones, for example. So
that's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say stick to the budget on the plugins until you have a decent monitoring setup. Then I would say the first thing is the DAW, because then you can start learning it, you know. I mean, if you choose Reaper, go for it. It's great. But invest in the DAW first, because then you start learning it. You start learning the key commands and all that kind of thing. And then at that point, you'll be like, maybe I don't need XYZ plugin because ABC plugin would actually fit my personal style better. Does that make sense? So I feel like there's so much choice in the artistry when we can actually like understand things a little bit better, you know. And there's so many tutorials that are like, I'm just as guilty that are like, you need this plugin. But actually,
right? We all are.
I mean, that's a good point, and I'm sure people are going to ask: is you're talking about the monitoring? So, what kind of headphones would you recommend to a beginner to try out? I know they're a very personal thing, right? People can make great mixes on not so good headphones, or people can make horrible mixes on really, really good headphones. So it's a personal thing that you have to get used to. Is there one that you would suggest for beginner? Maybe comfort, maybe just how the EQ curve is on that pair of headphones?
So I would say comfort is a big thing, just because you'd obviously be listening to the headphones for a long period of time. And for me, that was the choice, like why I went for these ones, because I've got quite big ears, and I never really felt comfortable wearing many of the other headphones, so I just ended up not. I ended up using speakers most of the time instead, but it's good to have both references. So a couple of the brands or models that I would suggest, first and foremost, I usually suggest open back headphones, just because they give you a little bit more of an acoustically correct representation of your sound. Generally, a closed space will have a resonant characteristic of a certain frequency. It'll resonate, and that can boost frequencies or cut frequencies or whatever the case is. So often with the closed back headphones, they do sound more subby, and they in turn also do create like vibration on your head sometimes if you're listening to them too loud. So I generally recommend open back headphones. They just sound more natural, more like speakers, except if you're in a noisy environment. So if you're in like a dorm or a student vibe, or if you travel a lot or something like that, then open back is not an option. So yeah, I would say the big choices are those. The rest is up to personal taste and comfort, I guess. Some of the stuff that I've used in the past that I've had a really good experience with, and actually working in the store, I sold thousands of them, and almost every customer was happy, is AKG K240, I think they are, or K2 something. Man, for the price, you do not get better open back headphones than those. They're not the most comfortable, I'll be honest, and they're a little bit flimsy, but the quality, sound quality for the price is phenomenal. They're not too far, like in quality-wise, from like the Beyerdynamics, but the Beyerdynamics just have the extra edge in terms of slightly more clearer upper frequencies and slightly more natural lower frequencies. The AKGs feel like they're a little bit mid-boosted. Still both great, accurate headphones. And obviously the Beyerdynamics are like just really, really comfortable. So
those get a good reputation.
Yeah, my personal top choice would be the Beyerdynamic DT880 Pros or 770s or whichever other models.
Interesting. There's a thing that I feel kind of bad that I used this, but a long time ago, I had those 7506s for a long time, or those monitoring headphones of Sony's. And for some reason, like my ears would always get fatigued, and then my mixes wouldn't turn out good with those headphones. And I kept searching, I'm like, what is the problem? Not knowing it was going to be the headphones, right? And I found some different software out there that would correct your headphones. And then I was like, okay, this has the model for the 7506s. And then I started mixing based off that, and the mixes did get better, absolutely. But then I was in a bind. Anywhere I didn't have that software, I was kind of dependent on that. So if I went on a gig and I put my headphones on, I had no idea what I was listening to. It was a completely different curve. It sounded like a different pair of headphones. So is that something that you had to face personally, or did you never open that door at all?
Yeah, so I do. I'm not sure if it was the same software that you tried. I'm using Sound ID Reference. It was previously known as SonarWorks. I've had really good experiences with it, but generally speaking, what I do is I will monitor with and without. So I have a separate pair of DJ headphones, like the Sennheiser HD25s. And for some reason with those, they're just like the most forgiving headphone. Like anything just sounds good on them. It's crazy. And so I find like if I do a mix in my speakers and my Beyerdynamics, and I listen to the track in the HD25s, it sounds normal mix, like flat frequency. So I don't notice the missing correction. Does that make sense? But on the contrary, if I listen to that same track without the correction on the Beyerdynamics, it's like, what is happening here? Everything sounds wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think it's just that we get used to that sound that we know. But if it's a completely different environment, i.e. different headphones, different environment, different context, sometimes that can kind of ease the gap a little bit. And maybe it's why the Sennheiser HD25s are so popular for DJs as well.
Yeah, and it's also a reason why I've kind of concentrated a lot on headphones as the times have changed, right? Most people they'd always reference on speakers, and then like they'd put the headphones on, okay, does this sound right? Okay, maybe bring the snare down a little bit. And then they bring the snare down, and finish the stuff on speakers. But as we have home studios now and everyone's kind of more so on a budget now, you can't really afford really expensive speakers that are out there. Plus you have to do the room, you have to treat your room. You have to really think about that because you're going to get some phase cancellation, right? I'm sure we've all sat there mixing a song and we're like, where's the bass at? And then you move your head a little bit backwards, like, whoa, there it is, right? So you're sitting in a spot and it's all canceling. So that's why it's kind of interesting how we're mostly on headphones nowadays, and then we'll sometimes check things on speakers, right? And sometimes that can be misleading because they're like, do I need a sub? Maybe you don't. Right. So that's kind of just the topic I want to pick your brain about, especially with headphones, because that's a very personal thing. And that's something that it's hard to really switch those out once you get used to them,
So I actually work the other way around. I work mainly on speakers, and then I kind of double check on headphones. I think I'm also maybe just it's a comfort thing. I don't enjoy wearing headphones for long periods of time. But I think it's also just the style of music that I make. I'm so used to listening to it on big speakers. And I think also there's something about it that requires the kind of acoustic environment. There's a lot of panning, a lot of space stuff happening. And often in headphones, reverb is like a little bit accentuated, or you hear it differently in headphones than you do on speakers. And I kind of have this idea that like most of the time my music is being enjoyed kind of like at a festival or at a club or on a set of speakers as opposed to a pair of headphones, because it's kind of more loud, I guess, EDM or electronic music, as opposed to kind of more easy listening stuff. And even myself, when I'm listening to music on headphones, I very rarely choose Psytrance just because it sounds a bit different on headphones, I don't know, it kind of needs the atmosphere.
This whole interview has been really inspiring and informative. I had no idea we are going to land on a topic about headphones, but here we are. It's like, there it is. But Dash, you've been so generous with your time, and I'm really excited to see where you take your music and your channel in the future. And again, from all of us, thank you so much for all that you give to the community. And we're honored to have you with us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you guys for having me. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate that, having me on and allowing me to blabber relentlessly.
Absolutely. We all enjoy it. And if someone's out there looking to learn from you and become better themselves, where can they find all your stuff at?
So I'm on YouTube, Glitch. Yeah, I've got masterclasses for sale on my Shopify. Otherwise, most of that information is available on my YouTube as well, obviously in shorter content form. And I also do sound packs and that kind of thing. So check me out on YouTube.
Awesome. We'll put all those links down there in the bottom. And thank you again, Dash. And thank you everybody for watching. And we'll see you in the next episode.